85% of global GDP basically comes from cities. They are the kind of engines of economic activity around the world. They consume a huge proportion of the world's natural resources. They produce a huge proportion of the world's greenhouse gases, or are responsible for them. And then the rural economy is there basically to feed the machine, literally feed the machine in lots of ways.
Traditionally, we think of the economic base of cities in terms of numbers, number of clever people, number of leading industries, the number of smart governance systems or smart technologies. And we tend to assume that large numbers of key growth factors produces a whole series of agglomeration economies. But these economies actually account for a tiny, tiny part of the life of a city, and often tends to exclude marginalized people, peripheral parts of the city.
There are two great stylized predictions. One is that as development proceeds, the rate of urbanization increases. The other is that as development proceeds, the rate of informalization decreases. Yeah? Well, the first of these predictions has come true. The second of these is not coming true. In fact, if anything, the rate of informality, it may even be increasing somewhat. So an interesting question is why? What has been happening is actually that informal enterprises have been moving into urban settlements and urban areas. And it's the big formal enterprises, the big factories and so on, which have been moving out. So we might as well actually work with the informal economy rather than view it as being something that we have to get rid of.
From my perspective, when it comes to major cities, is a very profound transformation that has not been picked up, and that is the extraordinary level of buying of urban land that is happening. And it's sort of an invisible story. If 27 buildings, this is one area here in central London, if 27 buildings have been bought up by one Chinese company, this is about buying property, you understand? The facades of the buildings don't tell you that. The material condition does not give you the story. The material condition keeps telling you these are pretty British buildings. So there is another economy that is installing itself in our cities. Singapore bought a big part of poor Detroit. Does anybody know that? No. And so my question is, in 5 years, when the last poor people have finally, what do I see there? Well, I see an incredible corporate center.
Whereas the history of good living in the cities of the north is the history of the state doing things, the history of markets doing things, the history of people functioning as individuals rather than as capable communities. They are over-dependent on functioning technologies and functioning infrastructural systems. Because unlike cities of the south, they don't have distributed lay community-based intelligence of the kind that you find, for instance, in the slums of the south, where in the absence of infrastructures, people are the infrastructures.
The next 25 to 30 years, we'll see the construction of cities for huge numbers of people in the developing world. 2.5 billion population increase by 2050. Now that is a lot of people, and those cities are going to require not just the obvious things like somewhere to live, but somewhere to work, and roads to move around, or public transport, and energy, and waste, and water, and food. They're going to need all of those things, and we've got 35 years to build that from scratch. So what we've got is an enormously exciting challenge, if viewed through a positive lens, or a really threatening one, if you think that that's not going to work very well.
I think having all your eggs in the big city basket is risky. Smaller towns and smaller cities is where I believe the action is, in the developing world in particular. And actually I believe that's where the action is in terms of poverty reduction. And I think of resilience as having a portfolio of large cities, and particularly medium and smaller size towns, so that the economy can respond in an appropriate way to the large shocks. And I think that's where policymakers have to now shift their attention much more than they've done in the past.
I think the resilient city is a city that is able to hedge its bets by having plural economic structures and opportunities. The world of small firms, the world of leading industries, the world of high tech, the world of elites and expertise, the world of the informal economy that's allowed just to get on with what it does best. Organizing for resilience is about empowering neighborhoods and communities.
It's about recognizing that if you lock yourself into certainty in an uncertain world, then business as usual is unlikely to do you very well. You've got to be able to be innovative, you've got to be able to be flexible. You can think of cities that specialize in just making brassware. That's fine, because that's where you've got a concentration of expertise, but actually that's quite vulnerable as well, because if the bottom drops out of the metalware market, then that's the whole city economy gone.
I want to bring in something that everybody seems to have forgotten. All our cities, before the global era starts, were poor. New York was officially bankrupt. Paris was poor. London was bankrupt. Tokyo was bankrupt. I think in 20 or 30 years we're going to have probably several versions of big cities. Some of them are going to be very problematic, which is a mix of slum and legal construction, but vast stretches. The other format, I think, will be really beautiful cities. And it's not grandiosity. It's not a Trump Tower. It's a lot of serious architecture and urban design. And then the third one is what we see in China, cheap construction, such a jungle of all gray high-rise buildings or super high-rise.
We are building cities, we are building infrastructure, we are investing in processes which may not be in the long term sustainable. But we're quite a resilient species. Our problem, I think, is that we're much better at responding in a crisis than we are to seeing a problem coming and planning and preparing for it. We've got a lot of problems coming and we know about them, so we haven't really got an excuse not to get ourselves organised. My hunch is that we'll probably need to have or wait until there are some acute situations which will then spur us to make a big change.
I mean, I'm congenitally optimistic, so that's just the way it is. But I think what's crucial for us to realize is that policy is all important. Things just don't just happen. Things can be guided, paths can be created, problems can be anticipated, and solutions can be put in place.
The market does some things really well and it does some things really badly. And what tends to happen, if you just simply let laissez-faire capitalism roll, is that the people who are at the very bottom are ignored. They're ignored because they're not valued, and they're not valued because they don't have enough money to be able to buy the products or the services, and that's simply unacceptable. It's unacceptable not just from a moral position, although it clearly is an immoral thing, but it's also because if you actually look at how corrosive inequality is socially, it destroys situations, it destroys communities, it destroys societies. Thoughtful, informed government priorities, clear frameworks, regulation, taxation will be an absolutely fundamental element in achieving successful, resilient cities. And cities that don't do that will not win in a competitive world. They will not attract the investment, they will not attract the talent, and they will become more expensive to run and will fail.
Am I optimistic? No, I'm not. Do I think this is necessary? Yes, I do. So if we get the city right, I think we could tackle a lot of contemporary world problems. We really could.
So there are so many good reasons why we should be rethinking what cities look like, what we do in them, how we do it, how we power them, what we do with our waste, that I can think that of almost no more exciting and interesting prospect than getting those right in the next 20 to 30 years.